This version of the podcast is mixed in mono, but if you would like to listen in 5.1 surround sound, please visit ufocast.co.uk/prisoner for more details. This is episode 7, and we recorded it 7th, back in February 2022. Welcome to episode 7 of our Prisoner podcast by hook or by crook, with me, Luke, and my co-host...
Me, Michael, from the Tin Dog podcast. But you probably already know all that.
Well, I hope people do by this point if they've stuck with us for this many episodes. And like a returning Colin Gordon as number 2, who, ironically, those are the 2 episodes preceding this that we haven't recorded yet. Steven has joined us, having been with us with his lovely wife Erica on episode 1. He's now back just on his own to talk to us about why he's a Prisoner fan, and many happy returns in particular. Welcome, Steven.
Thank you. I was originally intending to not speak for the first 23 minutes of this episode, but I feel like that would be bad podcasting. Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Hello. Well, very, very well referenced there. Very much looking forward to talking to you about this episode and why you've picked it. But as ever with all of our guests, how did you first encounter The Prisoner, and why did you become a fan, Stephen?
I first encountered The Prisoner. I'm trying to think when it was. It was during, I was in high school or junior high, so grade 9 or 10 or 11 in my part of the world. And it was someone who I knew at school, knew I was a Doctor Who fan, and told me that there was a show called The Prisoner, and that I should check it out. And, well, I never heard of it, and then he said, well, guess what? There is a Prisoner marathon happening on the PBS station that we had in our area. Same one I watch Doctor Who on all the time. And so he actually taped it for me, or I gave him 2 tapes, and he gave me like all 17 episodes taped on there. And so, oddly enough, like decades before binge watching sort of became a thing, Prisoner was like my first ever binge watch show, because I had them all 17 episodes right there on like one. I didn't have to wait 17 weeks to watch them. And so that was pretty much the first time I had ever seen. I remember seeing brief clips of it on CBC, because they aired it on Sunday afternoons or something. I remember seeing a shot, I think, that was eventually probably early parts of Fallout, maybe. And I thought, this is very weird and intriguing, but I never watched past that. So, and I just loved it. I thought at that time I was like getting into sort of like some more, surreal headspaces when it comes to fiction and everything. And this really, really spoke to me. I adored every second of it. I watched it nonstop. It just became, it joined part of my little background viewing, where I would put Doctor Who on and just sort of have it in the background playing endlessly while I did the same with The Prisoner. And of course, later on in life, I became much more aware of Doctor Who actors that were in it as well. So that became a joyous thing to watch out for as well.
So it's interesting. We're all Doctor Who fans. Our listeners are probably heartily sick of this by now. But I find it interesting that it was specifically somebody that knew you were a Doctor Who fan who said you should watch this show, The Prisoner. Why do you think that was, and where would you draw the connections in terms of being a fan of both?
It's funny because it's like, I'm a Led Zeppelin fan, but it's not like, oh, you like Led Zeppelin, you should listen to Aerosmith or Lynyrd Skynyrd or something like that. Like, well, yes, they're the same genre, but I think they're very different, and I like Led Zeppelin a lot better. And it's funny because people who don't really know much about, they know we like Doctor Who. Well, here's another British show that gets sort of lumped into science fiction, and it's from the 60s, and so therefore you would like that because it's it's like a Netflix recommendation. You've just had pizza. Here's some more pizza, Honestly, they're so different. The Prisoner and Doctor Who are so wildly different shows, not even touching on the production aspects of things. But I think there is that British sensibility that must seem normal to you and Michael because you have grown up with this. You were around this. But this is the type of just sort of different approach to everything that British television has always sort of had a hold over me. So while they are very different, I think because they just come from a different place, both geographically and just philosophically, compared to what everything else that was on, American and Canadian TV at the time. I think that's probably why it sort of gets kind of looped in, and it is kind of a short step away, I suppose.
Cool. So what? So I suppose the broader question is why are you something of an Anglophile?
Oh goodness me, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Doctor Who was the first thing that I think I became an Anglophile with, and which is weird because I embraced the cheapness of Doctor Who and bounced very hard off the cheesiness of Star Trek growing up.
See, that surprises me.
It surprises me, Michael. I can't tell you. I mean, one of my earlier the Graham Williams era of Doctor Who, season 16, 17, is some of my earliest memories. And I can remember feeling wowed, but also aware of how cheap Arato was in The Creature from the Pit. But then I watch Star Trek, which ironically I think was on at 5 o'clock before Hockey Night in Canada. So that's probably why I saw it on Saturday nights. And oh god, I'm landing on another planet, and I guess the sky is red. I could tell it was a set. Even in my youth, I could tell. Okay, well, all right. Oh, they're gonna do some cheesy acting and stuff. I just thought it was very cheesy. But for some reason, the Doctor Who, even though I knew it was cheesy, stuck out for me. And so I guess I became an Anglophile, and Doctor Who was the only show that I watched for several years, and then I discovered things like the tripods and the Prisoner, obviously, and I don't know if I just sort of latched onto them because they were British, or if they were British and so I latched onto them. I did try to watch Coronation Street when I thought, you know what, if I'm going to be a complete Anglophile, let's go hard in.
That's a dangerous.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So
I think you need to grow up with it. Over the past few years, we've gradually removed soaps from our lives in our house, and but because Coronation Street was so insidious, in the sense of it was always there, it was always on in the background, and there was that, and there was Emmerdale Farm, or Big Emmerdale with Fraser Hines, and then there was lots of other soaps, but the first one to go, EastEnders, you drop that. It's because the soaps went from 2 times a week, where you're thinking, oh, quality drama, I can allocate an hour to that. And then it ended up, they're on every night, and you're thinking, oh my God, I cannot give you 2.5 hours of my life every week forever. And the quality, the storylines were dropping and everything. And eventually, what you needed was bubblegum TV in your life. And you went, hang on, I don't actually need this. I wonder what life is like without these soaps.
Right.
And then I tried it, and I went, hang on, it's fine. Nothing's different. Okay, I now no longer recognize anyone who's on the ice skating, Dancing with the Stars kind of programs, because it's always and this person's in this soap, and I'm like, are they? That's lovely for them. I've no idea who anyone is. So that's the only thing that's missing from my life. So yeah, you're not missing anything not knowing Coronation Street, because classic Coronation Street, the stuff that was, I'd say, right up to almost the mid-90s, was a folk drama. It wasn't just a soap. It was showing us in England that could have been, that wasn't. It was very separate. And EastEnders was just a way of keeping the universe in order and going, everything in these people's lives are terrible. Your life is not as bad as these people's. Be grateful. And that, it was practically propaganda. That's what that EastEnders became. So I was glad to see the back of that. And Emmerdale's made round here, and I keep thinking, could I work on Emmerdale? And of course the answer is no, I can't. So, but that's basically.
But you
it. So
could go from Emmerdale to working on Doctor Who.
You could.
Yeah. Or the other way around.
Yeah.
I mean, the only soap that I grew up with was The Archers. And then I had a brief dalliance with Coronation Street and EastEnders in my first year at university, because of the people I lived with, and then that was it. So back to The Prisoner.
Well, if you want, let's just chat.
We asked this of all our guests, Stephen. So when you're watching The Prisoner, on what level are you thinking about it, and how do you interpret it, and why do you still keep coming back to it, and what does it mean to you? That's a very long. That's lots of questions all in one, but you get the gist.
It is. It's a show that constantly provokes thought. and reflection and investigation into what you think it means. I don't. And what I liked about it, I think I just go back when I first watched this show, I saw this at around the same time. It was probably 1990. Now I think about it, as Twin Peaks was becoming a thing. And so I think I saw this, and then Twin Peaks became, and everyone was talking about how Twin Peaks was really weird, and I remember sort of like watching a bit of it, thinking this is just weird for weird's sake. Whereas I feel The Prisoner, there's a surreal element to it, but it's also, it's also speaking out against things as well. I think so maybe not this one as much, the one we're talking about today, Many Happy Returns, but Free for All I think is the most overtly political one. There are, the general about, learning and stuff. And it's my opinion of Fallout has changed over the years. I've always loved it. I love every episode of The Prisoner. Literally all 17 episodes I could do a podcast on because I adore every one of them. But so oddly enough, I feel like the one we're doing today is one that I have watched a lot, but I think is maybe the most straightforward. It seems like that, but then you sort of think about it. Well, who is in on this? Who is in on the the plot to allow him to escape and then to drop him back in there? That sort of makes you think about things. For instance, today, maybe I just forgot about it, but today I watched it twice before we started recording here. I just had it on the background, and I never noticed that the two sailors on the ship have Village Foods food cans. I don't think I noticed that.
But that's because they've stolen them off his boat.
Oh, see, there we go. See,
sorry, I was like, what? Eh?
Yeah,
Ooh.
I thought for a second there. So I'm always finding new stuff. Yeah.
Sorry, I've just spoiled your little nugget there, Stephen. But,
no, it's perfectly fine. This is why, Luke, I keep watching these shows and don't really go into any new shows, because why would I? Yeah. There's even more gold to mine from something that's over 50 years old now.
Yes.
It's a show that just constantly rewards the viewer, I find. Sometimes I think we look into it a little too much, thinking, maybe, I was looking at the Wikipedia page for it, and like, in the fight scene there, you can sort of see the rippling of the blue background. Maybe they're kind of like on a Truman Show. So, no, it's just rippling of the blue background. It is still made in 1967. Above all else, it is still a 1967 show shot in the studio at times. Probably that ripple of the backdrop didn't look like that on 405-line television back in 1967, but when you up-res the original film masters onto Blu-ray, you're going to see it. Yep. So, but apart from that, it's it's a constantly rewarding watch.
Yes, and I think that aside, because I noticed that the this episode does stand up pretty well as far as the filmmaking goes. That is a slightly clunky moment when you're like, oh yes, they're in a boat in a studio. But aside from that, I think it looks brilliant. And a lot of it stands up well on Blu-ray. I'm going to make one comment here that I don't think I've made thus far. I've been listening to the 5.1 remixes this time through, and they're largely a waste of time.
It is. I mean, bless them for trying.
I can see what they've tried to do in places, but mostly it's like, I should just be watching this in mono, because it's not making a huge amount of difference. And there are a couple of places where it's massively distracting. Not in this episode. Mostly it's just the music that they've kind of bunged into all the speakers, and occasionally some of the sound effects. Yeah. I'm like, no, don't bother. Well, should we unless there's anything more to say before we get into the specifics, should we dive into Many Happy Returns?
I'm all for that.
Me too.
So, as you said, this is quite a straightforward episode. It's a slightly, I was going to say atypical episode, though I don't know what a typical episode of The Prisoner looks like. But
tell me what a typical
atypical in the sense that most of it is spent outside of the village. So, what was it about this episode that you wanted to talk about, Stephen? And why do you like it so much?
I like it, perhaps because it is atypical in that regard. I think Patrick McGowan is excellent, obviously, as number 6. He is the type of actor who can I made the joke at the start, not talk for 23 minutes in an episode, and yet convey everything that he is thinking, his character is thinking, and what he's doing without having to sort of like talk to himself. Doctor Who is a show that is very guilty of here's a character alone in the room. I'm just going to talk to myself. Or, I watch Star Trek Next Generation, and sometimes, and like towards the end there, when it's just Data hammering bits on code on something, and he's just narrating what he's doing, and just like, you're just telling the viewer what you're doing. You're just typing on a keyboard. Whereas Patrick McGoohan, just with a steely glance, just like, I'm going to do this, we're going to like this, and it's. I just love watching it. It's so magnetic that when he finally speaks, where is this place? I think is the first line. It just comes as like, he didn't speak for the first, there's been no dialogue for the first 23 minutes. And it's just the, it's such a bold thing. I don't know how this compares with television from November of 1967 when this airs, but the dips to black is obviously the commercial break. It goes a full first segment of the show, apart from the opening narration and all that bit, with no dialogue whatsoever. None. I mean, this day and age, if you made a show like that today, there's a show, Only Murders in the Building, Steve Martin and Martin Short, that is on Hulu in the States, and it's on Disney Plus probably everywhere else.
Yeah, it's on Disney Plus here.
Yeah, and there was a very famous episode that was sort of told through perspective of a deaf person, and there was no dialogue in it at all, apart from like sign language and everything, until the very last line of the episode. And everyone would praise it, and rightly so, because it's rarely you see a program through a perspective of someone who is hard of hearing. And like that created waves. That's obviously not the reason for why, there's no dialogue in this, but I can't think of another TV show I've ever seen that would have the gumption to just go completely dialogue free for an entire half of the episode. It's a testament to Patrick McGoohan's star power that he must have had, his sway that he had. He directed this under a pseudonym, Joseph Surf. He probably had a hand in writing parts of it. And of course, he was the star of it as well. It's a testament to the singular vision that he had for this show, possibly at the expense of other people's creative inputs. Wasn't this the last one of the one shot of the original 13? Which means we see George Markstein's cameo appearance in an actual show and not just the title sequence. And sometime around there is when he and McGoohan must have fallen out, which I find rather intriguing as well. But the location work is great. The McGoohan's performance is great. And the mystery as to why, the haunting scenes of this completely abandoned village is just there's so much to draw me to it, although as I say I could literally do a podcast with all 17. This is a tie, one of my favorites of the Prisoner series.
I mean, we talked last time you were on about how from Arrival onwards the village is a sinister place in contrast to actually being in Portmeirion itself. Does it feel any less sinister for being utterly deserted, or is it just a new level of this place is freaky?
Oh no, it's sinister because he's initially skeptical when he's going around thinking, testing doors, like, okay, the power's off here, all this is going wrong. He goes to the the Green Dome, turns the chair, his number 2's gone. All right, let's go, let's formulate, and so. He's going through the whole escape plan, and then when he hears a teacup break, he suddenly, this is it, isn't it? This is where the penny drops. So even then, even though he's confirmed that there is no one in this village, and he's nearly built his raft, and he hears that teacup break, that look on his face, thinking, "Oh, that's it." Like even he is still not convinced that he is free of this place, and it's just a cat. But even then, oh, that's got to be something. Well, let's just carry on. It's perhaps it's even more sinister because he doesn't trust it. He still, even though he's gone through this whole thing, he does not trust that he's not escaped from this village yet.
No, I do. The cat moment is brilliant, but I love the empty village. It just looks so great, and being able to shoot the empty village is just. Obviously, they had to close Port Marion for this, but it's just so odd to see the village so empty of people because you're so used to it being bustling and full. In the original script, there's a whole thing about him waking up groggy, and that's missing from what you see on the screen. As if he'd been extra drugged in order to get everyone out, out of the village and empty it. But I think it's a lot more. It works so much better that they've got everyone out just overnight. It's like, right, lads, off you go.
Where is everybody?
Yeah.
That's the question. Where is everybody? Is it just a case of we know that there's lots of bits of stuff underneath the village, and everybody's hiding out in a bomb shelter somewhere, or what do we think? Because it's a very elaborate thing to do for just one of your inmates amongst many, and I suppose that's another question about like the significance of number 6 to the village and all that kind of stuff. But it's an interesting thing of like, oh, they've gone to a lot of trouble just for him.
Or how much of it is in his mind? Is this just a mental thing? Is he in a dream? Is he in a fever dream? Has he basically just been injected with something and he thinks he's woken up in a place of nothing and maybe he'll spill his secret.
You're saying that this is another episode where the whole episode is in his mind?
Possibly. Maybe the entire series is, or maybe it isn't. This is why this show continues to be fodder for discussion, because it's so surreal in nature that, he gets back. All of a sudden, all the water turns back on. Here comes number 2. Oh, I can hear everyone. Pokes his head out the window. All of a sudden, everybody's back,
yes.
as if they've just been teleported there instantly.
Yes, that is interesting, that moment, isn't it?
It is very interesting. This is the surreal nature of this show, which I just adore. It doesn't attempt to explain it, and so it leaves the interpretation to the viewer.
And
it's
something I noticed.
Go on.
Sorry, go on, Michael.
No, I was going to say it's the definitive logical ending of that Hitchcock thing where he said the audience would rather be confused than bored. And that's what this series does in spades. It just goes, right, we're going to confuse you, and nothing's going to make total sense. You'll think it does until you think about it, and then you'll go, ah. And that's the logical ending of this. That's what we've got. We've got something that just confuses us. Because we sit there going, oh, yeah, he was a spy, is he? And he needs to escape, does he? And he's in the village, and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah.
So my argument for it not being a dream is that there are scenes that he's not present for. Brief snippets.
Yeah.
But obviously you see some stuff on the boat from the point of view of the two gunrunners. You have the conversation between Thorpe and the other dude. You also have the whole rigmarole with the milkman turning up, which obviously plays a key role in getting him back to the village. So there's enough moments towards the end where you're like, well, if it is a dream, what are those?
Oh yes, I know. I'm not arguing for the dream. In fact, I just thought of it as I was saying it.
As you said,
the fact that nothing is sort of like written in stone. You can't explain every little thing like that. He says, well, maybe we have to sort of consider that a dream is one of the possibilities. Yes. Probably not, but you never know.
But obviously, this episode does give us another aspect of where is the village, because as far as the show's chronology thus far, we've talked about the Chimes of Big Ben, so we can talk about that. That seemingly reveals the village to be somewhere else, but again, the plot of that episode means that that could be a lie.
Yeah.
This episode very clearly reveals it to be somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean off Morocco. But future episodes suggest it might be somewhere else. And here's an interesting thing in terms. I hadn't noticed this before, but it's kind of obvious, in one sense. But the kettle has a British plug.
Ah.
So you're like, well, then there's like you said before, there's the question of like who's in on it. Because I suppose we can talk about this now. It's not a spoiler. This isn't a spoiler to say that in 3 episodes' time. Patrick Cargill will be back playing number 2. Now, the question is Thorpe, the character that we meet in this episode, played by Patrick Cargill, do we think he is the same person as the number 2 that we see in 3 episodes' time, or not? Or does it matter?
Or is he the slightly furrowed backdrop in the back of the scene? Are you explaining that as a dream sequence, or like is it some sort of like fictitious land, or is it just the case of a 1960s TV show using the? I mean, Georgina Cookson turns up in
in A, B, and C.
A, B, and C. Is she the same?
Yes, and well, obviously that is a dream.
That is a dream,
which would be a dream within a dream potentially. Yep. Yes, I'd forgotten about her. But obviously, he does say in hearing about the village, he was like, it would be a nice place to go. And you're like, oh, you are going to be there in 3 weeks' time. Weeks' time. And does he know that at the time?
The argument against Thorpe being number 2 is that at no point does the prisoner go, oh, I know you from work.
Yeah.
And he never calls him Thorpe. That's the only argument against that. The argument towards, oh, they've just recycled the same actor, or he was in this one and they went, oh, we like him, let's get him back. It's not like he's going to be a cousin like, Freema Agyeman was. It's not going to be something like that. It's definitely a bit of, oh, he's only in one scene, well, a handful of scenes as posh English bloke. But Cargill's so good. There's a reason he was in so much stuff in the 60s and 70s. Is because he just holds the screen. I mean, he's in a scene with Donald Sinden, who, let's face it, odd
what
choice.
What a voice.
Donald Sinden, yes. Sorry, I'm just having flashbacks to Never the Twain. Yeah, not good. But Donald Sinden was in so much stuff from the 50s way onwards. I don't think he ever stopped working, but he had this stupidly fruity voice that you could never not spot whenever he was in anything. So perhaps they thought, oh, he'd just steal the scene away from Cargill, but Cargill's just there going, well, I think you'll find that your idea, the whole concept of the village is nonsense, is his arguments constantly.
That line, that whole exchange between the 3 of them with, we have a problem, tell him our problem, Thorpe.
Yeah.
Up to the point where McGowan says, I also have a problem. I don't know which side runs this village. That is one of the sound snippets on the Prisoner soundtrack. So that exchange is so burnt into my brain, and the way that he delivers the line is the whole like Hans Christian Andersen would reject from. It's just brilliant stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
And I suppose I don't know how aware you are. Stephen, of the work of Tony Hancock.
Only that Terry Nation wrote for him.
Well, yeah. So there's the whole Terry Nation
before doing Doctor Who.
It's a good starting point.
Yes, and I suppose I don't know. Maybe we should leave this until we do hammer into Anvil. But we're talking about Patrick Cargill. So Patrick Cargill is the doctor who takes his blood in. Now I want to get this right. Because there's the TV version of the blood donor and the radio ham, and then there's the radio version of the blood donor and the radio ham. So I think he's the doctor in the TV version of the blood donor, and possibly the radio version as well. And then he's the guy sinking in the... In fact, well, this is fantastic. This is interesting, actually. He's sinking in a boat off Sierra Leone in the radio ham.
That's a crossover.
That's a weird crossover, isn't it? I mean, obviously Sierra Leone is not that close to Morocco, but they're both on West Africa. So
yeah.
Sorry, but obviously, and that is that's a radio performance, and the it's absolutely brilliant, and that I suppose I think I knew that before I knew The Prisoner. He's just such a good actor.
Have you heard, this is very at a tangent, and I do apologise to anybody who's here for the Prisoner stuff, but has anybody else heard the theory that Tony Hancock invented the Daleks and gave the idea to Terry Nation?
I mean, I think he joked about that, didn't he?
He was backstage talking about it, and I think he was reading, because Hancock knew nothing about technology or anything like that, but he was talking about people mutating after a war as a sort of idle chat, and what would happen to them. They'd have to survive inside some sort of travel machine. And I like the idea of Hancock coming up with the Mark III travel machine, and we'll just leave it there. Sorry, I did interrupt, I apologise. But yeah, so he's the guy from Hancock's Half Hour. That is brilliant. I hadn't even spotted that, but yeah, that is great.
Yes.
There is the alternative.
I will
theory.
have to send you a copy of Stephen, because I think you will find both the Blood Donor and the Radio Ham absolutely hilarious. At least I hope so. Being
There's also
Anglophile.
the Saltzman thought, where although he looks like Cargill, it's somebody else's body inside that.
Oh, great.
So, or he might be number 2, but he probably just looks like him. So I think we'll move away from that theory.
should move away from that.
We can move into the Colin Gordon thing. Is he meant to be the same number 2? He doesn't sort of refer to, I just think it's 1960s-itis where you see different actors depending on how many times has Walter Randall been in 1960s Doctor Who. Most of them directed by Douglas Camfield. It's fun. But again, going back to my interpretation is everything when it comes to The Prisoner. You could look at something that was relatively common practice in those days in TV production, and it's not we look back and go, hey, wait a second, the guy who played Ben DeHere is also in episode 7 of the Daleks Master Plan. They make a joke about it. The fact that it's the same actor. It was so relevant, so prevalent rather in 1960s TV. But because it's The Prisoner, and because we overanalyze absolutely everything that happens in that show, we're all trying to concoct. Oh, maybe this is gonna be same actor.
So let's talk a bit more about the first half, where he's just not saying anything. The whole so he's taking photographs of the village. Yeah. He's going off on his raft and writing his log, and then running into these gun runners, these German gun runners.
Right? Can I just say this at this point?
Yes.
So you're pitching the story, and your basic linear story is, hey, how about an episode where the prisoner wakes up in the village, he escapes, gets back to England, and eventually he gets tricked and he ends up back here. Right, that's your plot.
Yes.
And then they say, right, we've got 45 minutes, 50 minutes, 52 minutes to fill. What you've described there is something we could probably pull off in about 15 minutes. You need to build the tension, okay. You need something to fill it. And I think the Gunrunners are the equivalent of wandering monsters in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, which has just been put in order to give us something exciting, a little bit of combat to keep the players happy, while we progress to the logical progression. So that isn't just like he escapes, he washes up on a boat on somewhere, and that's it. So he gets to do a bit of, action thumping and survival and taking people out. Oh, they're baddies, they're villains, who could they be? All that business, just in order to remind the viewer who he is, what is happening. It could be arguably a bit of filler.
It's also a way...
fun. But,
Well, it's also a way to... if he had gone onto his raft, managed to get a few days on the sea and then sort of passed out and then woke up on the beach, we wouldn't necessarily know that he had actually gotten away. Him encountering that boat of Germans, I think it was.
One of them says Schnell, I think.
Yeah, says he's
in the
outside.
They're Gunther and Ernst.
Yeah, so that's
let's go with German.
Stereotypical German as you can get. And I think having that there shows that he's not in the village anymore. He is in clearly a different place. They're speaking a different language. They don't like him. I think that's a way to sort of bridge the fact that there's village, then there's this wherever he is somewhere in the ocean, and then he washes up. I think if we didn't have that step, we would just sort of assume that he was in maybe right back in the village, and so that's sort of just a visual indicator.
I mean, I also love that. Although I agree with you, Michael, that there's an element of padding to it. It's a lot of fun, and the resourcefulness of all three of the characters in that little bit. You obviously got McGowan himself playing dead, waiting for the moment to get on board the boat. doing that amazingly hilarious thing with like, what can I do to make some smoke to make them think their engine is kaput, and then laying them out and tying them up. But then the resourcefulness of the two of them, of the whole kind of famous five thing.
Yeah.
Like, we've been tied up, or we're going to be back to back, and we're going to kind of undo each other's bonds thing, and then let's break through the cupboard into the next room. It's just that they're all kind of reacting on their feet.
Can I just say
to what's been happening to them? It's just a lot of fun to watch.
No, it is. When I was watching it for this time, it had been a while since I'd seen it, and I realised I needed to physically watch it because rather than just have it on in the background to remind me of the dialogue. And I'm watching the scenes, and because I was hungry, I thought, oh, he's been at sea all those time. He's gone to the kitchen. Before he tries to seize control of the ship, he's going to cook himself a meal. And I was thinking, I'm only thinking that because I'm starving right now. This is not good. I honestly thought, oh, that's clever. Take care of your triangle of needs. Have something to eat first because you're starving, and then take them out. And then I thought, that's just ridiculous. That's how I would survive in that situation, or get killed if you want. But so that was my initial thought during that scene as well, that he was just trying to make it something. But yeah, the creating the smoke, all of that business. You're right. There's a lot of almost MacGyver-y stuff going on. But it's nice that the other guys aren't just thick villains. You know, they're people who could probably shoot straight. They are legitimate threats.
Yes. Yeah.
I also want to. I'm just back in the village. The whole montage of him looking around, and I find sound is obviously an important part because there's no dialogue. The oral landscape has to be filled by something, and it's often the sounds of the empty village. But then also one of my favorite music cues when he starts planning his escape. Same music cue that they use in the Chimes of Big Ben when he's building his boat and stuff, which is one of my favorite, mostly timpani driven, as I recall.
So I waxed lyrical about that cue on our episode about Chimes of Big Ben. So I'm glad that you feel the same about it.
I love it. I love it to bits. I can't remember what it's called. Number 6 builds a boat or something like that.
It's called Number 6 Chops Down the Tree.
Chops Down the Tree. I love it.
But it's a library track, so it will originally have had a different title, which I can't remember. I don't have my CDs to hand, but yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad we agree there, Luke. I'm not surprised.
It's delightful. It's a lovely piece of music.
Yeah.
So, obviously, you've got that. Then you've got the really nice touch of he's landed in an apparently foreign land with the Romany bit. I love that because you're like, oh no, he's nowhere near England. How's he going to get home? Or America, wherever he's supposed to be from. How's he going to get home? And then you think, oh no, it was a throwaway because there are people in this country who don't speak this, who don't speak English, and that was genuinely clever. I thought. I mean, I could be wrong.
I think that's what you're supposed to think. You're supposed to think he's not in England, and the defining moment, a policeman. That is the moment where you're whoa, and you've just been thrown completely for a loop. Yeah. But and it's so cleverly edited that you're like, oh. He's in England, and these are the cars of the day.
Yeah, true. Can I just do a little side thing? When you discover, they go, and what was that all about? And they explain it, and they say, oh, there was an escaped prisoner. Tiny story. Give me a second. My first girlfriend from when I was like at school, her father was called John McVicker, who is a notorious gangland villain or murderer or something, and he escaped from Durham jail. And not my girlfriend's father, obviously. I mean, the actual gangland killer with the same name.
Oh, I see. Right, I thought you were saying her dad was actually.
No. They are very separate people.
Right.
Okay, so the actual villain escaped from the jail, and this gentleman was stopped by the police, and they said, "What's your name?" And he said his name. And the police went, come on. No, seriously, what is your name? And of course he was being honest and was telling his name and ended up being arrested for wasting police time for not giving his own name. And they had to find out that, in fact, it was his own name. He just happened to share a name with a notorious gangland person. Sorry. So, yeah, that's what came to mind when it was like, no, we're just looking for an escaped convict. And I was thinking, oh, don't give your name. Don't give your name as Peter Smith if there's an escaped convict called Peter Smith. Yeah.
Which he thinks long and hard about.
I just desperately needed to tell it. Sorry. I did digress, but that's what I was famous for. Right.
Yes. So is his name Peter Smith? Because he doesn't go for... If you were going for the straight down the line, pull it out of the air, you'd be John Smith, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Or Joe Bloggs or whatever. But Peter Smith...
It's
in
interesting.
the script, he always
and he
refers
thinks
to himself
about
as
it, too.
P.
Oh, okay, because he's sort of like, Peter
Smith.
Thinking, okay, perfect. I will take you at your word. Yep. It takes all of us a few seconds to remember what our name is, so yep.
Before this recording, you sent me a picture of you and and Erica at the house.
Yeah.
So you've actually visited the location of where he ends up, which neither of us have, I think.
Oh, really? Yeah. In 2017, our second trip to England, Andrew Smith took us around a brief tour of prisoner. We went to various locations. We went to London.
Sorry, I genuinely thought it would have been pulled down by now.
No, it's right there. It's
Brilliant.
the exact same house, and we just thought, oh my god, it's right there. That's it. Some of the exterior elements have changed a little bit, but yeah. So we went out of. It's actually not that far from Westminster, I think. When you look for it,
I'll have to visit it at some point when I'm next in London.
In London, yeah. Well, we in Canada just assume everyone is in London, so it's just down the street. Why don't you go? I mean, come on.
Well, I will be there in a couple of months for Time Fracture, but I don't know whether I'll have a chance to do prisoner locations at the same time. We will see.
That was the only location that we did. And I suppose by default, I've been on Westminster Bridge a couple times, and I think that they shot. That scene from the Sandbaggers near there, but I do want to find the McDonald's, or at least the location where the McDonald's was, or perhaps the renovated McDonald's where they often had meetings at Neil Burnside and Jeff Ross from the CIA in the Sandbaggers. But that's the extent. Yeah, but this is not the Sandbaggers podcast.
This is not the Sandbaggers.
No.
Yes.
We promise we will watch it at some point.
We will watch it at some point. Can
Sorry,
we talk about KAR 120C?
Go
yes,
for it.
One of my favorite cars. Yep.
So I went down a slight rabbit hole on this because I thought. So I don't know whether you know this, Stephen. I don't know whether you know this, Michael. There's a website in the UK. It's very useful. Called it's a government website. Something like "Is my car taxed?" Because obviously, you might forget. Now, since they removed tax discs from cars in the UK, it's not very easy to remember when your car is up for its tax renewal.
I can vouch for that. It's an absolute nightmare.
Until they send you a letter. Anyway. And it also says whether you've got an MOT, which for international listeners stands for Ministry of Transport. And it's a test that your car has to pass every year to say it's roadworthy. And you can go on and literally put in any license plate you want, and it will tell you the current status of that car, if the car is obviously still in existence. So I thought, that car is probably not in existence, but does the number plate KAR 120C still exist? And the answer is yes.
It does. I just did it myself.
So I then went down a bit of a rabbit hole, and it turns out that Caterham, which was the company that basically bought the design off Lotus when Lotus disappeared, and they make something called the Caterham 7, which is pretty much the Lotus 7, registered one in 2001 with the number plate KAR 120C, and until last year, when it was declared off-road, it was obviously kind of around. And its MOT has now expired, so it's not drivable at the moment. But the number plate still exists, which I think is quite lovely.
That's really nice.
It's very different than it is in North America, where a license plate is not tied to a car; it's tied to the driver more than anything. So it's fascinating to watch. I just watched Die Another Day, the James Bond film, and and Bond has a relatively pedestrian license plate number, but they sort of have to be that in order to be on screen. Anyway. British license plates. It's a whole other topic that I find very fascinating.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. It's a nightmare if you want anything personal, and you can transfer them from one car to another. That's I think there's quite a big fee, so most people just put up with what they're given. Finding a personalised reg on something is a very expensive hobby that a lot of people just don't bother with.
So yeah, tell us what you think about the car and how it plays a role in this episode.
I've always loved the car. It's it's something that you can't find here, obviously. I don't even know obviously it was an actual car, but the fact that number 6 says like I built this with my bare hands and stuff, and I don't know if it was a kit car or something.
It was a kit car. Yeah,
it was a kit car, which is why you probably can't find it anywhere. No, I've always thought it was just a sign of of rebellion. Even then he wasn't driving like this little Morris Mini or something like that, driving to work back and forth. Like it was this very defiant self-made kit car. Which is sort of like just is part of his personality that is so ingrained in The Prisoner, but only because we see it in the opening titles every single week. So it's actually it's kind of intriguing and a bit of a surprise to see it in this episode, and of course driven by someone who was at number 6. I've always been a fan of the car.
Yeah, I believe he was. They wanted him to drive a different Lotus.
It was the Lotus Elise or Elan.
Something like that. And that was currently being driven in the Avengers.
Yeah.
And so he didn't want to drive that. And he happened to see this when they were showing around. And he was like, that's the car I want. So it's very much McGowan, as well as number 6, kind of doing that whole, yes, I'm gonna drive this thing. And you can't, the Caterham 7, you can buy a Caterham 7. I think when I looked it up, it's currently going for about £22,000.
That's nothing.
So if you have that spare, my favourite thing about it though, when I was reading up about it, was that apparently you used to have to remove everything from the luggage compartment to get to the fuel cap on one particular model, and then on the next model, they'd moved the fuel cap to the outside, and the comment was, so now you could pour fuel directly over your shoes instead of your luggage.
Just demonstrating my age for a moment.
Yeah.
I used to work when I was in my early 20s, in fact, when I was in my late teens, in a bookstore called Dillon's in Newcastle upon Tyne. And we had the transport department on my floor, and one of the books you could buy was Build Yourself a Sports Car for Less than £1,000. And it was the manual on building this car. It was building the Lotus, well, the Caterham 7, because obviously inflation's kicked off, and it was an old book anyway. But I remember picking it up going, oh my God, I could own and build this myself. And then I realised, no, I couldn't build this myself. I would just end up with a very expensive pile of crap. So, yeah,
to give a reference to Stephen, you would be like Garibaldi trying to build his motorcycle in Babylon 5.
Yes.
And then Lanier would come along and go, let me build your Caterham 7 for you, Mike.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind Lanier building me anything. I'd be fine.
No, I'd love it. Yeah.
I love that the car doesn't have signal lights. You can see him do his hand signals out the window, over the side of the door as he's turning right into the Parliament buildings. I thought that's
apparently also the speedometer was much easier for the passenger to see than the driver.
Which, to be fair, given my experience of driving, would be ideal for anyone who's in the car with me. As my wife leans over and goes, "You're speeding," and I'm going, "I'm not. I'm not. What? I am not speeding."
From my angle, I'm not speeding.
From my angle, I'm under 30. Oh, you're doing 33? Oh, okay, I'm not. Yeah.
So what do we think of this week's number 2? I mean, it's obviously cleverly hidden in the opening title sequence in that we get an extra shot of Rover during the usual reveal moment, and then we don't find out that she's number 2 until the very end. But what do we think of our Mrs. Butterworth?
She's great. She's brilliant. I love her in the building. I also like that she's interviewed by Thorpe to find out if she's like on the up and up, and she appears to be, which is a nice moment because he's not. There's no number 6 involved in that scene at all.
Yeah.
But that is very, very well. But she's very, very good. I mean, for me anyway. And when she brings out the cake, I love that his birthday is like the 19th of March, which is the same as McGowan's. But apparently the scenes between them was written a lot drier, and that most of that was improvised between the two of them together. So it's nice because you see a much more human side, a bit like in Schizoid Man, where you've got a very nice version of the prisoner. You've got quite a nice version of him and a grateful version when he's having his fruit cake or whatever it is he eats.
Yeah.
There's a certain flirtatious element.
Yes.
I love it when he sort of turns up and, and he's like, oh, I know this car. It's KO. And she sort of stops and sort of looks him up and down like she's sizing him up. And I just thought it's a really interesting dynamic, especially, McGowan, famously, asexual in his motives in the show, so much so that he wouldn't even put his arm around the actor who played Nadia at Chimes of Big Ben because he didn't want it to sort of feel like he was with another woman. And I just thought this is an intriguing bit of energy, a playful energy from Georgina Cookson as Mrs. Butterworth, and then and then there's sort of the bad cop element of her housekeeper who is very standoffish. And just sort of go, it's just like, oh, my mistress is not here. And when he eventually comes in and she goes to him, oh, is this the gentleman you saw earlier? And just the way she sort of looks over and goes, yes, that's as if she's identifying a suspect in court in a similar manner. Sort of really hammers the point home that she is much more friendly with this, stranger who walks in off the street. And she just welcomes him into her home, which perhaps in itself should be somewhat suspicious given what we find out at the end.
Yeah, and there's all that stuff about the lease, and you're like, the lengths that the village have gone to not only kidnap him, but to essentially take over his life. There's clearly some shenanigans gone on in terms of the lease being transferred from him to her, and it being through a different agent and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not overly familiar with house rental in the 1960s and the legalities of all that stuff. But there's it's a further violation, really, isn't it? That not only have they kidnapped him and taken him to the village, they have stolen his house. And we will see it again. Later in the series, in an episode that Michael and I have already recorded with my dad. We will see it again then. But it's that kind of thorough, you've really done a number on number 6's life, which he doesn't. I guess he doesn't realise at that point. It's only later when he ends up back in the village and she's revealed as number 2 that he will realise that number 2 is living in his home. But it's quite the sucker punch, really, isn't it?
It is, the invasive nature of it, the wiping, is that the point of it? I mean, when you think about the various techniques that number 2s have tried to sort of break him and get him to admit why he resigned and everything. And I feel like this episode, they're not really looking into, why he resigned or thing. It's almost like as if to break him to say that your only home now is the village. We've literally scrubbed you from existence in your original
never
home.
Ask. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
because they never ask. Oh, all we know is that you resigned, and then they never have. Oh, and by the way, why was that? Because that doesn't come up.
Or maybe it was them sort of you resigned, and then perhaps there was something maybe ease him into since they don't believe his story, maybe they think. If we sort of indicate that, you resigned and now you're trying to say this story, maybe he'll say, in order to prove that what he is saying about the village is true, he'll reveal why he resigned in the first place. But of course, he never does that. He's defiant to the last. Although I like that. Going back to the village bit again. You're talking about how sort of pleasant he is, with Mrs. Butterworth and stuff, and very polite and everything else. There's also the point where, even though he's, scavenging from the village to make his escape raft, so to speak, he takes supplies from the village store, but then notes down, what he owes. And then at the end, number 6 ? Which I just I find that he's still polite and I'm doing this honestly, damn it. I might be a prisoner in this village, but I'm not a criminal, damn it. I just that we see that sort of that side to number 6.
Yeah, I love that moment where he chalks that up on the counter.
Yeah,
and as you say, it's still defiant to the last, because he needs to identify himself for their purposes, but he's not going to fully admit that he is number 6.
Yeah.
And he gets very annoyed with them on the outside when they call him number 6 because he's told them that was his number.
If you call me that again, you're likely for a bout in hospital. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a slip? Is that a mental slip on their part, or is that them just sort of like laughing at like the fact that you are number 6? We're in on this. It's the lines are blurred. I'm not too sure if you were actually doing a con like this, you would constantly sort of laugh in the face of your mark, knowing that what you're going to do to them. It's intriguing, the fact that they keep calling him number 6. I suppose he has no name. So I was watching The Invasion recently, Doctor Who story, and of course the Cybermen famously don't appear until the very end of episode 4, and in order to cover up the fact that they are going to be appearing later on, no one refers to them as the Cybermen. And so like there's several scenes in episode 2, I think, where Packer is going to Tobias Vaughn, well, do our allies know who they are? And then after the reveal, it's all Cybermen. So you have to call them something, I suppose. And maybe he said that he was number 6 in the village, and they just keep going on as a bit of a joke for it. That's an explanation, I suppose.
And I suppose that avoids them revealing what they know him as.
Because they would arbitrarily just name him, Philip. Hey, Philip. Let's keep calling him Philip. Good to see you, Philip. Yeah.
But I suppose the thing that lends credence to the fact that they're not in on it is the whole shenanigans with the milkman.
Yeah.
Because certainly, if the guy who was going to fly him was in on it, then they wouldn't need to replace him. So he at least is not in on it.
Right.
Which leads you to believe that the others are not in on it, and the only person on the outside, the only 2 people on the outside that we know are definitely in on it are Mrs. Butterworth and the milkman. Like the episode doesn't require anybody else to be in on the plot to get him back to the village. And it's one of those things where I don't recall if I noticed the first time I watched the episode what had happened at the end. Watching it now, you're like, it's very obvious that they give you a good look at the milkman before he goes into the hut, so that when he turns around and does the whole "be seeing you" thing, you're like, oh yeah, he's a different person from the guy who was supposed to be flying the plane. But I'm not sure it was something that I noticed the very first time I watched the episode.
Once again,
it's very cleverly sketched in without any dialogue. It's show not tell very much. So
yeah, I know. Nowadays, there'd be a dramatic slow-mo reveal or something, or some cutaway or flashback. Oh, this is the guy that is actually driving the milk truck, and you have to watch closely back in those days, and you don't have a VCR either, to record these.
I tell you, what's the worst culprit for that? Death in Paradise. Because they now have flashbacks to things you saw 5 minutes ago in the episode. And you're like, come on, we just saw that. You do not need to give a flashback that much that soon. And this is kind of totally the other end of the scale. It's like, are you watching carefully? Because we've told you everything we need to know. You need to know about what's about to happen. And still, and then you get that reveal. And you're like, okay, yep.
Yeah.
When the aeroplane's flying over and you see Port Merion, you can see, if you look at the top half of the screen, the road to Port Maddock.
There's a big road there. I didn't know what it was, but I figured this doesn't feel as isolated anymore.
Because at the beginning, he's going to drive. He's got these mini smoke, and he's going to drive around, and he drives to the edge. I know it's nice that he builds his raft and he floats off, but in the episode, he drives to the edge and he's like, oh, I can't go that way. There's mountains. There's no one to stop you. Go that way. There's mountains. It's fine. Oh, but there's another mountain and there's some clouds. Oh, he can't go that way either. He must build a boat. And you're like, are you sure? Because that just sounds like quite a hassle thing to do.
But obviously, as it turns out, if he'd gone over the mountain, he'd have been on the other side of the island and still had to build a boat.
No, that fair enough. Yeah.
So I have to say, I didn't notice the road myself. I mean, I
only saw it for the first time.
There was
ever
that part of
today.
my brain going, well, I know where that is. That's North Wales. That is not the same island that they've showed us in wide shot. But it looks enough like it could be to sell the shot. Is there anything else we want to say about the episode? I'll throw it over to you, Stephen, first before we start to wind down.
It's fabulous. The sound, McGowan, and the village, I think, are the real stars of this. Although it is nice to see just London back again. The outside world. So I suppose we see it a bit in China's Big Ben, but to be out on location and at that actual his house really makes you think that he's got there. He's got home. He's got away from things, and there's a slight comfort there until he gets yanked back. Which, if you were looking at this sort of dramatically, it almost feels like this is a devastating event in number 6's life, because this is probably as close as he's ever got. He actually got back to his home, and before he got transported back there, it wasn't like a fake home or anything like that, like Chimes of Big Ben or anything like that. It was the closest taste of freedom that he had at that point, and it's particularly devastating.
Michael?
Well, all I've got is the bit I normally bang on about, which is the Alex Cox interpretation bit.
Oh, right, okay. What does he have to say about this one?
Well, in this one, this is the one where he goes, right, we now know who runs the village. And you go, sorry? I wasn't paying attention to that much. His implication is that basically he's turned up and he's gone, hello, British establishment, this is where it is. Now, if the plane doesn't come back, they know where they were searching, so they send someone else, which they don't. The reason that the pilot is replaced by the milkman is because it's a black ops thing, and they don't want other people knowing where the village is. And also, he's definitely an engineer, because he'd built the car. James Bond wouldn't build the car; he'd just be supplied it by M. And I think that's kind of it on the Alex Cox interpretation. And I'm not particularly with that one, but I can see the arguments.
Yes, I suppose. Yes, there is the question of what do they, if the people who've sent him back in the plane aren't in on it, why don't they try and find him?
Mm-hmm. Or perhaps I know your other half, Stephen, did suggest at some point, because I did hear this some time ago, that actually Thorpe goes searching for him, and then he gets ejected, and that's how he ends up being number 2.
Yeah.
which was a lovely theory, and one that I was quite up for at the time. I was thinking, I'm going to remember, because there are certain things I remember from your original podcast where actually that makes a lot more sense, and that was one of them. I was very impressed by that thought. So perhaps he did search back. I just don't know. But anyway, they're the theories, because Alex Cox is always banging on about him being a scientist or an engineer rather than a spy. And It's like, fair enough, that one makes sense. So that's where I'm at.
Cool. Before we go on to spot the Doctor Who actor for this episode,
right?
Okay.
I just want to revisit Stephen's last appearance with Spot the Doctor Who actor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to share my screen with you guys. Right. Now, this chap in the wig,
that's right.
I believe, Stephen, you identified
this... That's never a wig.
You identified this chap as David Garfield.
Was it David Garfield, or were we wrong about that?
Well, no, that's who you identified as David Garfield.
Yeah.
However, let me share another picture with you.
Okay.
From a few moments earlier in the episode, and I think you'll agree that this is David Garfield.
That is definitely David Garfield. Yep, okay.
And at the time, I was like, are we talking about the right person?
That's Ricky Gervais's friend.
Oh, it does look like him, doesn't it? Anyway, so I'm glad I've cleared that up. So,
thank you.
I think you were going to knock this one out of the park, Stephen. There are 2 in this episode.
Yes.
Can you tell me which of the 2 Doctor Who actors that you spotted in Many Happy Returns?
Yes, they are both friends in the same boat. We have John Lorimer, who was in the Duke in I can't remember his name. I want to keep calling him Carleone. That's not his name though. Is it Carleone? No, from Mask of Mandragora. Several years before that, of course. And then we have Dennis Chinnery, who the first time we've seen him in Doctor Who, he was also on a boat as the captain of the Chase, I believe. I'm doing this from memory. I knew this was coming, but so I didn't want to cheat. And of course, he plays as Garmin in Genesis of the Daleks, and tops off his Doctor Who trilogy with perhaps his most electric performance as the father of the Silvestri twins in the Twin Dilemma. So
Yes.
Yeah. What a legacy. What a legacy for Dennis Chinnery.
Well done. Did you spot either of them, Michael?
Just this Dennis, and I only got Genesis of the Daleks because, let's face it, if you're in the UK and you're a Doctor Who fan, you've seen Genesis of the Daleks about 2 billion times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose the only thing to add to that, Stephen, is Count Federico.
Federico,
the character
thank
that
you.
He plays in The Mask of Mandragora,
And
which
where was
is
that
also
shot?
filmed in Portmeirion.
It's true. Which, oddly enough, he was not. He was not in Portmeirion for this, but...
We've
and
come
the question
full
was,
circle.
Is he in Portmeirion for that? Or is he only in studio scenes?
No, he is definitely on location because I know
on location.
he gives a
It's in
proclamation.
the gardens, isn't it?
Yeah, he gives a proclamation on the where number 2 does in Arrival. They've dressed it up a bit differently, and
yeah. So it's slightly ironic that he appeared in an episode of The Prisoner and wasn't in Portmeirion.
Yeah.
But yes, well done. I mean, I have to say that even now, knowing that is Dennis Chinnery, he doesn't look very like Dennis Chinnery to me.
No, he's got the beard. He's got the sort of the stubbly beard on.
John Lorrimore is a lot more recognisable. But I have to say, when I first watched this, I didn't spot either of them. So bad fan.
Nor did I.
Now I know to look out for them every single time.
I have now. I saw nothing but them when they got on. Thinking, yep, that's him. That's definitely him.
The other thing to point out, this has nothing to do with Doctor Who Watch. I don't know whether you spotted this, Michael, but I kept thinking that the admiral or whatever he is, who's kind of helping him plot his course, seemed incredibly familiar, and I couldn't for the life of me remember why. And then I looked him up, and of course he is Mr. Twitchin or Mr. Twitchin from the Gourmet Night episode of Fawlty Towers.
Oh, you and your Faulty Towers.
Oh my! I know that one.
You know what? I'd save a lot of time if I just wrote down everyone who was in every episode of Fawlty Towers and just pinned them up on the wall.
Yeah. Which brings us back to the UFO cast, because in UFO cast, Mr. Hall, who's the guy with the twitch, who he won't say Mr. that whole ring roll. He appears in an episode of UFO, and so we commented on him when we did the UFO cast. We now have the other half of that comedy scene in this. Yeah. So, thank you for joining us, Stephen. This has been a lot of fun, and we will be back next week with
another episode.
I think. What is next? Is it Dance of the Dead?
Dance of the Dead seems to be
my page over.
the unofficial every episode order. I say I have no idea what episode order you're going
Dance
on.
Of the Dead.
We're
number
going
2
with
is Mary Morris. Yes.
We're going with the Blu-ray order, so I think it's Dance of the Dead next week.
It might not be the correct order, but it's the most common order, and that's it was the order that I got way back on those 2 VHS tapes that Kevin Thomas taped for me back in October of 1990. So to me, that's the holy order,
that's the order.
I'm glad you're adhering to it.
Lord only knows which episode we're going to record next.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's written down.
I believe actually we are recording Hammer into Anvil, which is the next one with Patrick Cargill.
I would have listen. It was a coin flip between that and this for me.
Okay.
Yeah. So obviously I'm a Patrick Cargill fan because those 2 are the episodes that stuck out for me.
Okay, well, I hope you look forward to, at some month's time, hearing what we had to say about that.
Yes, I have no idea when this is all coming out, so I look forward to listening to them all.
I guess we should round this episode out. So, as ever, goodbye to Stephen.
Goodbye. Be seeing you. Thank you very much for having me.
And I will leave the final word, as ever, to Michael.
Be seeing you.